Hey everyone, how's it going? I thought I would do a video today about the books and resources that I've used over the years to learn my hobby of game development. I don't do game development as a career at the moment. I'm mostly a web developer, so like JavaScript, CSS, all that good stuff, React, Svelte, Angular. That's kind of my meat and potatoes day to day. But I've always had a kind of an undying passion and interest in game development as a hobby. I started getting really interested in game development about the age of 12, and I'm now 32. So I wanted to just have a talk through some of the resources I used at the time and maybe kind of compare with what is available now if you were kind of in the same position and wanted to get into game development. So the story begins with a trip to PC World, which is like sort of the big box shop for like computer equipment and stuff like that. It's probably equivalent to like Best Buy in America, or like Circuit City when that was a thing, I think. Same kind of thing. I was having a browse through there and I found this book here. This one really stood out. It was Sam's Teach Yourself Game Programming in 24 Hours. Yeah, 24 hours. That was absolutely what was going to happen. I picked this book up thinking, oh, I'm going to learn game programming from this. Like I said, I was 12 at the time. Take it home, start flicking through it, and it turns out that it is all written in the Win32 API in C++. Bit of a problem. I had no idea what C++ was. So, I was thumbing through the book. I used the resource disk, which I think had like Borland C++ compiler on it. Had no idea how to use any of this, and I completely failed. Fell on my face. So this book went on a shelf for 2 years, and then I think sometime casually when I was about 14, I was like, you know what, I'd really like to get into that game programming thing again. Maybe I should give it another try. So picked the book up, and I started reading the intro, and it's like, oh, you should have a knowledge of C++. And I was like, what is C++? So then, by this point, this was 2005, so like everybody started to have like, slowish broadband internet at the time. So I started doing some Googling and I found, I think it was like C++.com, and also I used to go to the public library as well and I would rent out C++ references. They were quite outdated ones, and the tools that would come along, the provided tools would be like really, really old, like DOS based. I'm just saying this to myself. It's like, they were like DOS based IDEs, like development environments. So I spent like a good amount of time in the mid 2000s typing everything out in a command prompt. Typing out basic C++ in a command prompt with really, really outdated compilers, and that's kind of how I started programming. And then I moved on to find out that you can use like APIs. So although I didn't really understand how to use the Windows Win32 API to like build Windows and stuff, I did use the Windows APIs to change the color of the console. So then I started making all these little like battleships type games where I would use like a teal color on the console, and then I'd like try and find the thing that's coordinate and all that. Anyway, that was like the first few games that I made. Yeah, I had my library books. I had this book that I didn't understand, and then the real breakthrough was when I think I got my pocket money together when I was about 15 or something like that, and I bought this book, Sam's Teach Yourself C++ in 24 Hours. Now that was a little bit more achievable. It did not take 24 hours, but as you can see, it's quite a ragged book. Why is it ragged? Because I used to thumb through this book constantly. Like I was on a mission. I said to myself, I'm going to learn C++ so that I can understand this book, right? I still only partially understand this book. So I bought this book from Amazon. I remember very distinctly it coming like in like 2 days or something, which was like amazing at the time. So I got this book and I just sat down like religiously and used to read over the chapters. I remember not being able to get my head around how classes worked, and I remember reading this thing over and over and over again. I must have had a lot more patience than I do now. and much more of an attention span. But this book, I just read it cover to cover. And once I read that book, I read a few other C++ references, like just different ones. I don't have those anymore. I think I donated them to a library, so I don't have those anymore. This is what gave me the ground in programming. Essentially, you had a few websites that you could learn C++ from, like C++.com. That was always a good one. There was lots of references, so if you knew what you needed to find out, you could go and look it up. There weren't a lot of tutorials, or they were just like scattered around the internet. So what you usually did is you went to forums and you found places and asked questions and stuff. So I did a fair amount of that, but I always like to read a book. Like, I like to have a, call me old-fashioned, but I like to have a paper reference to look through and go back to, and that's kind of the way I work. I've tried doing this with like Kindle books and in ebooks, and I just can't. It just never works. I never read them, so I'm still kind of like that. And then one day, I think when I was about maybe 16, I was probably at Borders, I think, and I came across this book here. This is one that I just found on a whim when I was just on a trip, and that is, it focuses, Teach Yourself Games Programming, and it's got LaFrog on here. This book is what really got my game development hobby going, right? This book uses SDL, the Simple Direct Media Layer, like SDL1 at the time. It's full of practical code examples. This was exactly what I needed. It's short, it almost fits in your pocket, and it was really fun. I think I had like a summer of fun making stuff with this. Like, this was amazing. This is the book that got started. So from then on, I started making stuff, and I put it on YouTube, and I found communities of people who were also doing this kind of projects. And then going on from there, really it was all about community and about talking to people and just demonstrating stuff. Also, as time went on, resources for learning this stuff got better. I think as people contributed to the community of user guides and stuff, video tutorials, all that stuff kind of bloomed, because all these people who are reading these kind of books, just finding these random books in Borders or Waterstones or whatever, they all started to come together on YouTube, and it was just very, very exciting at the time. Now, what would I do these days? That's a good question. I've been seeing comments on some of my friends' YouTube videos, and just around, what would you do these days? Well, the good news is that you've got so much variety. There's the learning curve for just getting started and making something is much lower now, I think. There's still a learning curve. You've got to get over that, though. You're learning some of the basics of programming. Get your head around variables, get your head around functions, get your head around how classes work. These days things are very entity based, so it's good to learn about composition. Get kind of a grounding on design patterns, which, by the way, I have some books that I would like to mention as well. I learned design patterns mostly at university, but I honestly think that learning the value of design patterns, you can do that way earlier. Design patterns make everything simpler. They make your code more reusable, just make your code slick and work really well. So one book for game programming patterns that I like is this one here, which is Game Programming Patterns, which is, yeah, the name says it all. This has a bunch of really useful and applicable patterns that you can use in your games. If you're building a game engine, which I know these days probably isn't as much of a thing, because there's lots of plenty pre-built engines and integrated environments that work with those engines. I understand that it's not as much of a thing anymore, but if you are making your own engine just for the intellectual curiosity, or maybe you just find making engines fun, highly recommend this book, Game Programming Patterns by Robert Nystrom. It's got some really good stuff in here, it mentions things like the state pattern, why we'd want to use it in games, the entity component system pattern, observers, all sorts of stuff, and then some other stuff is related to performance, which is important in game development. Sometimes you're restricted by the hardware constraints of a certain platform. Really good book. Going back to what I would do now, what would I do now if I was 14 again and I was learning to program and wanted to do games, either just as a hobby or as a profession? I'd still try and read up on things. I think it's good to have some kind of a reference at hand. I think the current generation who would be interested in this probably will be more au fait with using like a tablet or like a e-reader, which I think is good. If you find those easy to use, then highly recommend finding some good programming books. There's loads out there, loads of great programming books out there. I'm sure there are like new editions of some of the books I've shown there. I think that the ecosystem of game development, game engines, and development environments, it's much tighter integrated now. There's a lot more vertical integration. Yeah, you have Android Studio and you have Java and the Android SDKs. It's very easy to get it all together and get started. If you wanted to do something like Godot, which is a game engine, I believe that it has its own IDE, so it's already tightly integrated and easy to set up. Yeah, by virtue of that, there are lots of tutorials from the providers of the engines as well, like really good step-by-step tutorials. So seek them out. Try and find what language and what engine you would like to use, and then see if it has good documentation, good tutorials in particular. Back in the day, all we really had were references, and we had to kind of magic up like how-to guides for ourselves. Unless of course we stumbled into a bookshop and found somebody who'd already done it for us. But these days you don't have to do that. There's loads of different things you could do. You can find the tutorials on the site of the creator of the engines. There's usually still printed books that people will write who have used it before. I think in particular there's like the popular publisher here is Pact Publishing. People tend to well, obviously they don't self-publish, but they tend to publish through Pact Publishing, and you tend to get these nice thick weighty books for a particular engine. So that's always a good one if you like to have something that you can scroll about. You can scroll about. Something you can flip through with your hands. You can go on a site like Udemy and watch video tutorials. Lots of people have done video tutorials for fairly reasonable prices, so that's another way to go. And of course, lots of us are on YouTube. A lot of us are making tutorials. My stuff is a little bit outdated. I might look into some of the newer technologies just for fun, and maybe make some tutorials as well in the future. But yeah, you've got YouTube. I don't use TikTok, but I'm sure that there are TikToks that will take you to resources, and people do blogs as well. There's lots of like Medium blogs and like Substacks, and a few people still sort of publish their own websites, but it's definitely become a bit more consolidated. There is also, of course, Reddit, which I don't know. It depends if you like Reddit. I frankly can't stand it. It makes me feel terrible whenever I use it. But it undeniably, Google basically just scrapes Reddit now, so you can probably find solutions to problems on Reddit. Of course, there's the good old Stack Overflow as well, where you'll ask a question and you'll get somebody answering saying, no, don't do it like that. Use a completely different technology and do a completely different thing to the question that you asked. But that being said, sometimes it is useful. I still use it professionally as well, so most things you can get a generic answer on, so there's always that. And it's free, so that's always good. But I think the most important thing is just keep trying. Programming is something that can absolutely be learned. You might not get program principles the first time that you pick the book up. You might do what I did. You might find a book that's too advanced for you, and you don't know what you're doing. You might put it on a shelf for a couple of years and then just get that sort of itch to go, oh, you know what? I would actually like to learn this now, and then find a more appropriate book. It doesn't have to take 2 years. Just do a bit of Googling, find some ebooks, look up some tutorials on YouTube. It's really, really accessible. And if you don't understand something, guess what? All of us couldn't understand something at first, and it gets better. You just have to keep trying. But try and match the resources that you use to your ability level. So be honest about your ability level. If you don't know how to program, try and learn the basics, and then you can move on later, because you got your entire life to do that, especially if you're just doing it as a hobby. If it's just a hobby, then take your time, pace yourself, and there's plenty of us on YouTube and on the internet where we're all doing projects, and just good to be part of the community and ask questions and just have a good time. So anyway, this was a bit of an off-the-cuff video that I had been thinking about it for a little bit while, but I didn't really know how to put it all into words. But I hope you enjoyed it, and I guess I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks.